Okay, so turmoil is happening in the second vision. We've got falling stars that turn into bulls, that mate with cows, that create donkeys and elephants. Very strange. Anyhow, that's where we left off. That's how we started the last one. We left off with Enoch saying that 7 beings took him, and 3 of them took him to the highest point of somewhere else. So anyway, the original 4, he starts off and he said that one of those original 4 light beings grabbed the star, the first star that fell from heaven, and it bound it hand and foot and cast it into the abyss. So the original fallen that we learned way back in book 1 was Azazel. And it sounds here, this is Archangel Michael grabbing him up in this vision and binding him just as it is described to us in previous parts. It continues and says, and one of them drew a sword and gave it to those elephants and camels and donkeys, and they began to smite each other, and the whole earth quaked because of this. Now remember, these animals, these elephants and donkeys and camels, are representative of the offspring of the fallen and the women. And it did say earlier on in some of the first parts that in the end they had to end up destroying each other. Enoch continues and says in the vision that one of those 4 who had come forth stoned them from heaven and gathered and took all the great stars whose privy members were like those of horses and bound them all hand and foot and cast them into the abyss of earth. And of those 4 went to that white bull and instructed him in a secret without his being terrified. He was born a bull and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel and dwelt thereon. And 3 bulls dwelt with him in the vessel, and they were covered in. Not Jesus getting a nickname, the white bull. Okay, let's continue. But is it Jesus though? So when we originally read about the bulls, I want to talk about that just a little bit. There was the first white bull, and then it said that a cow came after, and then it said that there was a black bull and a red bull. And the black bull killed the red bull. That sounds like Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, right? And it says that the cow, who I think would be Eve, went to go and look for the red bull and couldn't find it. And then the original white bull had to come to her, console her, and from there she created another white baby bull, which then created generations after it, which, as we know, there was a 3rd son after Cain and Abel, and that is the lineage that Enoch comes from. That son's name is Seth. Anyway, meet me in the next part. Okay, so I don't know if anyone else is catching all this symbolism and representation. So from the bulls, Adam and Eve, and then Cain and Abel, and then everything that happened with the fallen. So think about it. The first bull, they use colors for a reason so you can identify. The first bull was white, right? Then there's a cow. Then there are 2 other bulls that are black and red. The black one killed the red one. Cool. Well, it did say that there was still a lineage of little black bulls that came from that murderous black bull. And then it described how the original white bull then mated with the cow again and created a lineage of other white bulls. So, and I hope this does not trigger people, because every time I start mentioning color, people get very upset. This is so beyond that, right? But there is symbolism in the colors for a reason. And then, of course, the fallen stars that mated with the cows and created unnatural beasts as well. Anyhow, let's continue where we left off. So it said one of those 4, so the archangels, went to one of the white bulls and instructed him in secret without him being scared. Now, it did say that he was born a bull, became a man, and they told him that he would build a great vessel. So who are we talking about now? We're talking about Noah, right? The great vessel being the great boat, the ark. And it said that there were also 3 bulls that went with him. Those are Noah's 3 sons. So it does describe Noah in this part. Also, Noah being one of the white bulls, because again, this is the lineage of Enoch. Seth, the 3rd son from Adam and Eve, that's the white bull lineage. Verse 44, after that part about the great vessel, says, Enoch is talking. So I raised my eyes and saw towards heaven a lofty roof with 7 water torrents. Thereon, those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. So for anyone who is into like the firmament and there being a dome or a globe, it describes the water rushing into this enclosure, which would be the Great Flood. He says, "Behold, fountains were opened on the surface of the great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface, and I saw that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water. All of the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together until I saw how they sank and were swallowed up and perished in that water. But the vessel floated on the water, while all the oxen and elephants and camels and donkeys sank to the bottom with all the other animals, so that I could no longer see them, and they were not able to escape. They perished and sank into the depths." So for everyone who has been reading or studying or learning about the monsters under the sea, there they are. It then goes on to discuss how the water goes down and how they're able to see the land now. But the next part, they talk about 3 bulls again. Listen. Not me getting bullied in my own comment section to hurry up and finish or continue the series. Okay. Book of Enoch has a lot of you in a chokehold. Me as well. So let's keep going. Okay, so we last left off. It's book 4, chapter 5. And Enoch is talking about the second vision he had. So we're going to continue on. We know that we already saw Noah as described as like a white bull that went into this vessel, so the boat. So let's continue here now. It says, "But that white bull became a man and came out of the vessel, and there were 3 bulls with him. And of those 3, there was another white bull, there was a red one, and then there was a black one. The white bull then departed from them." Okay, so I know from the Bible that Noah had 3 sons that he brought on the boat. So he had Shem, he had Ham, and he had Japheth. And I believe that Shem is the other white bull. I think they're using the color white to show the lineage of what's going to go down from here. So let's keep going. "They brought forth all these beasts of the field and the birds. So they were lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, falcons, eagles, ravens. And amongst them was born another white bull. The animals began to bite one another, but the white bull that was born amongst them ended up having a wild donkey and a white bull with it. And the wild donkeys multiplied. But that bull, which was born from him, ended up having a black wild boar and a white sheep. The wild boar ended up having many other wild boar offspring, but that sheep begat 12 sheep." Where are my Bible story people? Do you know who we're talking about here? Let me break it down. I know it is confusing. So original 3 bulls, and I said the white one I believe is Shem, which was like a favorite son of Noah. They end up having, he ends up having sons. Well, in that lineage is another white bull who is Abraham. Abraham is in this lineage. From Abraham does end up having 2 sons, and that was just stated here. It said that one of the white bulls had a wild donkey and a white bull as well, in addition. So who is that? Well, the wild donkey, I think, is Ishmael, and the other white bull that was born is now Isaac. It continued from there and said that that white bull, who I believe is Isaac, ended up having a wild boar and a white sheep. Again, the color white. In the Bible, we know that Isaac ended up having 2 sons, Esau, who I think is the wild boar, and Jacob, who I believe is the white sheep. Why? Because it said that that white sheep ended up having 12 sheep of its own. And Jacob, who is also known as Israel in the Bible, he has 2 names, ends up becoming the patriarch of all the Israelites. He has 12 sons. Are you catching all of this? Okay, meet me in the next part because it continues on here and I'm going to keep breaking down the lineage. Okay, part 59. So we are still talking about Noah's second vision and book 4, chapter 5. Now let's continue because we found the lineage from like Noah to Shem all the way down, all the white bulls. And we got to the point where now there's a white sheep that had 12 sheep. So as I said in the last part, I personally believe that is Jacob, aka Israel, who ended up having 12 sons. So let's keep going. Now, when those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the donkeys. Then those donkeys gave up that sheep to the wolves, and that sheep grew up amongst the wolves. The Lord brought the 11 sheep to live with it and to pasture with it amongst the wolves, and they multiplied and became many flock of sheep. So if you know the story of Jacob's / Israel's sons, Joseph was the one that was sold and ended up living with the Egyptians. Okay. The wolves began to fear them. Those are the Egyptians. So they oppressed them until they destroyed them. They cried aloud on account of their little ones and to complain unto the Lord. Now the sheep which had been saved from the wolves fled and escaped to the wild donkeys. And I saw the sheep, how they lamented and cried and besought their Lord with all their might, till the Lord of the sheep descended at the voice of the sheep from a lofty abode, and came to them and pasteurized them. He called that sheep which had escaped the wolves, and spake with it concerning the wolves, that it should admonish them not to touch the sheep. The sheep went to the wolves according to the word of the Lord, and another sheep met it and went with it. And the two went and entered together into the assembly of the wolves, and spake with them, and admonished them not to touch the sheep from henceforth. So I believe that this is Joseph when he was living amongst the Egyptians. There was a time when his 11 other brothers came into the area looking for food, and they were in danger. And so Joseph basically protected them, although they didn't recognize him and realize that this was their sold off brother. The Lord came to the sheep, and they began to smite those wolves, and the wolves began to make lamentation, but the sheep became quiet and forthright ceased to cry out. I saw the sheep till they departed from amongst the wolves, but the eyes of the wolves were blinded, and those wolves departed in pursuit of the sheep with all their powers. The Lord of the sheep went with them as their leader, and all his sheep followed him, and his face was dazzling and glorious and terrible to behold. But the wolves began to pursue those sheep till they reached a sea of water, and that sea was divided, and the water stood on this side and on that before their face. And their Lord led them and placed himself between them and the wolves. So now we know where we are, like in the animal story now. So, we've moved on. Obviously, generations have continued on. And now we're actually talking about Moses. So all this Enoch is seeing in his visions. So let's continue and see what happens with this Moses part in the next part. Is this all not crazy so far, how it's all tying in back to the Bible? All right. Anyway, I think we're on part 60 now. So let's keep going. So in the last part, the sheep are running from the wolves. So the wolves are the Egyptians, and they find themselves being guided by the Lord, as it said, and they reached a sea of water. So what is the next thing that it says? The Lord placed himself between them and the wolves as the sea was divided. The water stood on this side and on that before their face. Now those wolves did not yet see the sheep, so they proceeded into the midst of that sea, and the wolves followed behind them. Then those wolves ran after them into the sea. When they saw the Lord of the sheep, they turned to flee before his face, but the sea gathered itself together and became as it had been created, and the water swelled and rose till it covered those wolves. And I saw till all the wolves were pursued, those sheep perished and were drowned. But the sheep escaped from the water and went forth into a wilderness, but there was no water and no grass. And they began to open their eyes and to see. And I saw the Lord of the sheep pasturing them and giving them water and grass, and that kept the sheep going and leading them on. The sheep ascended to the summit of a lofty rock. After that I saw the Lord of the sheep, who stood before them, and his appearance was great and terrible and majestic. And all those sheep saw him and were afraid before his face. Side note, terrible here doesn't necessarily mean ugly or awful, but it's shocking to see the face of God. All right, anyway. So they all feared and trembled because of him, and they cried to that sheep with them, which was amongst them, "We are not able to stand before our Lord or to behold him." Now that sheep which led them against ascended to the summit of the rock, but the sheep began to be blinded and to wander from the way which he had shown them, but that sheep wot not thereof. Okay, so let's just catch up a bit, because I know that was a lot. So in the Bible, we know that Moses carried the people, through the sea, which we saw here. But they were, in this part, it said that they were blinded, which in the Bible, it said that they were lost and they were wandering. And it got to a point in the Bible where they started to get frustrated and not getting to where they thought that they were supposed to go, this, paradise. And they started to kind of, sin against God, and God became upset about that. And so they turned to Moses in the Bible to help them. And it did say that they were headed to the summit of a lofty rock. I believe in the Bible that would be referred to as Mount Sinai. So just trying to catch everyone up, because I know those words get a little bit confusing. It continues to describe that sheep came down off the mountain because of the Lord's wrath and how it had to bring the other sheep back into the fold or back into alignment. Meet me in the next part for the continuation. More happens.